Okay, I'm going to talk about graphs in this one, and graphs can come in a lot of different ways. Some cool ones are ones that are animated and show a lot of information in just a little bit. And I'm going to go to a website to kind of illustrate this. This is from a guy called Hans Rosling, and he has done a lot of work with United Nations and poverty and stuff like that. And using United Nations data, he created this graph about the relationship between life expectancy and income. So is health related to wealth in terms of countries in the world? And if you look at each one of these dots, they represent the countries. The color represents the continent they're from. The size of the bubble represents the population. So India and China are the biggest. The US is pretty big, right? Russia is pretty big. Indonesia, Bangladesh. Wow, I didn't know Bangladesh was so big. But anyway, what you can do is starting at 1800, if you look at it, right? The whole world, average life expectancy is only about 40 years. In some of these countries, right, it's only about 25, meaning that on the average, most of the people listening to this could expect to die in the next couple years. Uh, anyway, as it goes through, and countries get wealthier and wealthier, and you see some of these things. China went through a very bad economic time there, a lot of people dying, famines and stuff. Uh, as countries get wealthier, the Asian countries in particular, right? People in Europe, I should say, people are living longer. And as we keep going and going and going, countries are getting wealthier and wealthier, and their life expectancy is going on. And we have the world as it is today, with all the bubbles being much larger, of course, than they were. And you look at the poorest countries in the world, right? Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, their life expectancy is by far the shortest. And the wealthiest countries, of course, U.S., Japan, China, Qatar, we all live the longest. So this is a way to show many variables all at once. We have country of origin, we have continent, we have size of the country, population, we have life expectancy, and then we have income as well. And when we talk about different types of graphs, the type of graph you use, kind of like when we're talking about bar graphs and histogram, depends on what kind of data you have. Here's another one that looks at vocabulary growth over the first 2.5 years or so of life, excuse me. And so we have vocabulary and age, and then you have different types of families. And you see that by the age of 3, kids in professional families have a vocabulary that's more than twice as big as kids on welfare, and a little less than twice as big as kids on working class. And these differences just keep going. They level out a little bit when kids start going to school, but it's not enough to make up for those gaps. Other examples of things you can do: pie graphs, bar graphs that were created in previous classes, and the people who are watching this missed the competition. It was very intense. This is deaths per season, and so the person made this background of summer, or spring, summer, fall, and winter. I thought it was really nice. And then you have, again, total fatalities by month, all this information in one graph. Here are some tutorials for how to do these things, but I'm going to just go through a few in the data set. So if you go to D2L and download the Graphing Data 2, we're going to make a few graphs. And in the first case, we're going to create a graph that shows tuition increases over time. So we have the year tuition for the college and student population. So what we're going to do is just highlight the tuition. We're going to go to Insert. We're going to make a line graph because I have two continuous variables, year or time and tuition. So that makes me use a line graph. And I do it and I get it. And it showed these are my dollars. The problem is that down here I don't have my years. So in order to do that, I'm going to right click, select data, and I'm looking for my horizontal category axis. And I want to edit that. It's going to say, well, select a range. I click on that little button, highlight my 90 to 95, close that up, and you see that it got replaced. And then I click OK. And I can add titles and stuff if I want. This has, you know, the stuff here and there. All kinds of stuff, data labels in there. I can edit this if I want and say what I wanted to say. If I wanted to select the data, I can change this to tuition, and then I'm done. So that is how that's done. So if you wanted to in class, I had you make these yourself. But I'll just go through these other ones. So in other words, to show the graph that shows population growth over time, what I can do here actually is I can just slide, oops, I can't do that. I can just slide this, come on, over to here, if it lets me. It's not letting me. Let's make a new one then. We'll highlight student population. Do a line graph again. And you can see a lot of people started, big increase in population right over here. I need to change this again. So I click on that, select my data. I need to edit. I'm going to put my years again. Click OK. I'll get rid of this. And there's my graph. And get rid of these guys. Now this other one here, creating a graph that shows tuition increases that also account for student population. Now I need something that gives me all three of these things. And I'm going to highlight all three. Oops. Go back to my charts, and under other charts I have this bubble graph, just like the one that was in that Hans Rosling website. And this is the same kind of thing. So here I have the years, here I have the tuition, and each bubble represents the size of the student population. And if I want to, again, I can make it look different, right? If I want to, and say these represented different particular years, I could go through my menus and change this one to red. I could change this one to a different color. Basically, I could make them look real pretty. Hey, something happened to my computer. And so on. I'll make that one a dark purple. That's nice. And so on. So, anyway, that's how those things work. Now, I had you also look at this data set 2 earlier. So if you don't have it ready, get it ready. And we're going to be making some graphs and some pivot tables out of this. And they're going to be based on these questions here. So, first thing, I want to create a table that summarizes writing scores for each race. The question is, how do I do that? Well, I have race here, and I have writing scores over here. Now, I can just highlight everything if I want, because I'm going to need all this information anyway. So I'm going to highlight all these things. I'm going to go to Insert, get a pivot table going, click OK, and now I have all my variables in here. Now the question that I had was create a table that summarizes writing scores for each race. So, where was I? Here we go. So I need my race in my rows, right? African American, Asian, Caucasian, Latino. And then I need my writing scores and my values. But I don't want the sum of the writing scores because there aren't equal number of people in each one of these ethnic groups. So I'm going to change this to average score. And I have my pivot table. Now from this, I can create a graph that shows, just like we did before, that shows all the information that I need. So I'm going to copy this. I'll copy it like that. I'm going to go to my questions and I'm going to plop it in right here. I'm going to paste special. I'm going to just paste the values again. so I don't have to deal with, changing the pivot table and then changing everything else. So here are my values, right? Now, because I have a categorical variable here and a continuous variable here, when I have a categorical variable, I'm kind of stuck with either a bar graph or a pie chart. There's other things I could use, but those are the things. A pie chart doesn't really make sense here because I'm talking about different scores. So a bar graph seems to be the most or the best way to go. So I'm going to pick a column 1 again, throw it in there, and voila, I have my graph. Easy as pie. So we're going to do another one. I'm just going to leave him here. This one I want to show the frequency of each race in the sample. So going back, I'm going to rename this so I know how to find it. I'm going to call this my pivot table page. Okay, so if I click on this pivot table, this menu comes up. I don't want writing scores in there anymore. I want race here because I still am interested in race, but I also want the count of how many of each race are in there. And oddly enough, it defaulted right to it, which is nice. Usually it does sum of race, but I guess because I don't have numbers, it skips the sum. So again, I'm going to take that, copy it, put it on, I'll rename this as my graph sheet, graph questions, make it easy on myself. Plot my table in here, use that highlighted, create a graph, and there I have it, right? Apparently many more Caucasians in this sample than there are any other ethnic group. Alright, so this is a typo, or an extra one. Create a graph that shows the relationship between reading and math scores. Now, when I have two continuous variables, I have a problem in that I am not going to be able to use a pivot table to make sense of this really at all. So what I'm going to have to do is go back to my data. Where is my data set? Here it is. And if I want to look at reading and math scores, I think it was, right? Yeah, reading and math scores. I'm going to highlight those two things. And if I want to highlight two things that aren't together, I highlight the one, hold down the control button, and then highlight the other. And then I can highlight two things that don't have to be next to each other. I'm going to make a scatter plot here. When I have two continuous variables, it makes it a lot easier for me, in this case in particular, when I'm looking for the relationship between two items, to use just kind of a graphing technique that puts... it didn't do all the hidden ones. Well, I'm going to have to do that. I'm going to... Excuse me. To unhide things, highlight the row before and after what you skipped, and then click unhide. So I'm going to actually move this one over here, delete this, and now I can just highlight both of these things. And now I can go back to insert, scatter, and it shows me how it kind of plots out the math scores and the reading scores on this grid. And what this shows me is that even though there's a lot of variation, the general relationship is that when somebody scores high on math, they also score high on reading. There are some exceptions, right? This person's score over here is a little high, but it's relatively low compared to the overall pattern. So I'm going to get rid of that guy. Plop him in here. Create a graph that shows number of schools of each size or type, whatever we want to call it here. So I'm going back to my pivot table. Don't need that. I'm going to look at school type and school type. Only in this case, I don't want sum, I want count. So I have 506 schools of size 1 and 2 schools of size, or 94 schools of size 2. And if you're asking yourself, well, what kind of graph should I make? Again, I would make a bar graph that would look like that. And there's nothing else to it. Next question would be, create a graph that shows the number of individuals for each race for males and females. Now if I go back to my pivot table, I know that I need males and females, so gender, and I need race. So, oh, and I didn't, hold on here. See if I can add the field. I didn't put gender in there. Well, let's see if I can change that quickly. Go over SES. Well, yeah, I had a different idea. I'm going to try and paste this over my SES and then change the label. I'm not sure, because it's in a pivot table, I might not be able to do anything about it, but let's give it a shot. We'll call this gender instead. And now let's see if it's changed in my pivot table. Nope. So I got to do that again. Alright, well, back to the old drawing board here. I'm sure you're having a blast listening to this. Pretty amazing stuff, I know. So I'm going to get rid of all this stuff, hide it again, because I'm not going to be making another graph like that. And again, this is just so I can highlight everything. So now I'm going to highlight this stuff. I'm going to make a pivot table. And now I have my, well, sex or gender. I'm going to make my rows of each one of these. And 1s are males and 2s are females. Now I can't really, it makes it easier if I have actually values instead, or labels instead of just numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find and replace all this stuff. So I'm going to highlight this gender role. I'm going to hit Control H, which gives me this find and replace option. And in this column, I'm going to replace all the 1s with male, and I'm going to replace all the 2s with female. And it tells me how many it did, 327 and 273. So, once I'm done with that, see if it changed in my pivot table again. I doubt it. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Let's give it a shot here. Nope. So I guess I'm going to have to make a pivot table over again. Dang it. This is really dragging out. Oh well, you're getting your money's worth, right, for the class? Maybe. So, I'm going to highlight all this stuff again. Create my new pivot table. There's probably a way to adjust the data, but I haven't looked for it because I never really need it. So, going back, putting race and gender in here, right? Now I have African Americans, females, race. And the question wants me to get the number of individuals of each race for males and females. So, if I put the race count in here, right? What it gives me then is it breaks it down automatically. I don't need to put gender in here too. I mean, it can, but it's going to give me the exact same thing, so it doesn't really make sense to put it in there. And this is what I get. I have a nice pivot table, and now again, the question is, do I need to make this a line graph, a bar graph? What am I doing? I think in this case, and I always suggest to play around with things. One thing you could do in this case, you could do a pie chart. And if you look at this, right, you have African American female, African American male. And if I was being kind of a smart person about this, I might decide that I want to keep my race as kind of a consistent color and just differentiate a little bit between the two. So Asian female, Asian male, right? Asian female would be that green. I might want to make the Asian male a lighter green, and so on. Caucasian female, and so on. And can't see all the data labels here. There. Latino male, Latino female, and so on. So I could do it that way if I wanted to. Or I could make it into a bar chart, just like this. And then that makes a lot of sense too. And as we see from this, there are pretty close to equal number of males and females in this sample, which is a good thing. Now the last question is create a graph that shows average reading and math scores for each gender. And, oops, lost my pivot data sheet. So, I need math and reading scores. I need gender in there yet. I need math, but I don't want sum of math. I want average, right? And then I also want my reading scores. Where are they? There we go. All right, and then if I wanted to, I can just highlight these things, not the grand total. And I can do a bar chart if I want. It makes sense in this case, right? Here are the males, females. That's fine. I could flip these around too if I wanted to, but it's easy to read any way you slice it. But that's it. Then we had a challenging class to see who could make theirs the prettiest, and things that you can do is you can put textures, you can make these three-dimensional, you can put little animations in them if you really want to improve or really want to be flashy about it, and things like that. So people spent some time. We did it for 15 minutes, and the winner got a Subway card. We'll have more competitions if you missed this one. If you have any questions, let me know. As far as what you need to learn in Excel, I would worry. We're going to do some more about it. I wouldn't worry about it too much. But I will be having you do some stuff for an assignment in this next week. So, that being said, shoot me an email if you have any questions. Thanks.